"When exactly is the wedding?" I asked. My sister burst out laughing, the sound sharp and bright against the heavy quiet of our mother's living room. The thick, fermented sweetness of expensive champagne hung in the air, mixing with the sugary vanilla scent of fondant from a white cake box sitting open on the mahogany coffee table. "Danny, it was yesterday," Courtney said. She tapped her crystal flute against her new husband's glass. The sharp clink made my jaw tighten. "But we kept it family only. You know how stressful big crowds are." I sat on the cold leather sofa and looked at her. Then I looked at our mother, Constance, who was busy smoothing an invisible wrinkle in her cashmere cardigan. Connor, the groom, stared fixedly at the floorboards, refusing to meet my eyes. 39 years old, a decade spent as the chief operating officer of our family's event management firm, and I was finding out about my only sister's wedding from a leftover cake box. I managed million-dollar crises before most people had their morning coffee, yet I had completely missed the deception happening in my own family. "Family only," I repeated, letting the words settle in the room. Mom finally looked up, her expression a perfect mask of maternal patience. "It just made sense, Danielle. A small ceremony reduces the drama. After everything Courtney has been through, she needed peace." Nobody mentioned the honeymoon. Not one person brought up the luxury Caribbean resort package sitting entirely on my personal credit card. "We will definitely make it up to you with pictures from the trip," Courtney said. She leaned back against Connor, radiant and entirely satisfied with herself. She spoke about the trip with total ownership, treating my gift as if it were a basic obligation I owed her. "The trip," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "Are you still using the exact itinerary I booked for you?" "Obviously." Courtney rolled her eyes, taking a long sip of her champagne. "Connor already bought his resort wear. It is going to be perfect." "Don't be petty about this, Danielle," Mom added, her tone carrying that familiar edge of warning she used whenever I questioned family expenses. "Be happy for your sister." I nodded slowly. "Got it." I walked out to my car a few minutes later. The late January wind in Columbus bit through my wool coat, bringing the sharp smell of impending snow, but I did not turn the heater on when I got behind the wheel. The leather steering wheel felt freezing against my palms. I just sat in the quiet, pulled out my phone, and opened my personal email. The reservation for the Caribbean resort was under my name. The charges were completely tied to my platinum card. I scrolled down to the cancellation terms, reading the fine print carefully. As long as I canceled 24 hours before check-in, I would only lose a small administrative fee. Courtney and Connor were scheduled to fly out the next morning. I tapped the cancel button. A confirmation screen popped up immediately, showing the massive refund processing back to my account. I saved the receipt to a private folder, closed the browser, and then I muted the family group chat. I did not cry, and I did not draft a long, angry message demanding explanations. Instead of driving to my townhouse, I went straight to a small, leased office space on the other side of town. The glass door displayed a modest frosted logo for Northline Operations. This was my consulting firm, the business I had built quietly on the weekends, entirely separate from Mercer Event Group. Unlocking the door, I stepped inside and flipped on the desk lamp. A deposit check from a new hospitality client sat on my blotter, ready to go into an account neither my mother nor my sister could touch. 18 months ago, Courtney had asked me to guarantee a massive loan for a boutique salon she wanted to open. Refusing her request was the turning point. That was the day I realized my family viewed my money as a shared asset, and the exact moment I started building an exit strategy. I unlocked my bottom drawer and pulled out a thick, black notebook. The label on the cover read Vendor Exceptions. Inside were pages of handwritten notes, documenting 18 months of strange invoices and mismatched addresses flowing through our company's accounts payable. I traced the edge of the paper. I was not trapped. The next morning, the winter sky was the color of wet iron. I was sitting at my Northline desk drinking black coffee when my screen lit up. A text message from Courtney had just come through. "The agent says our reservation does not exist. Call me right now." Seconds later, an incoming call flashed on the screen. Courtney's name pulsed urgently. I smiled. A small, quiet movement. and turned the phone face down on the wood surface. The vibration rattled against the desk for a full minute before it stopped. I took a scheduled call with a new client, walked them through their quarterly projections, and took careful notes. I gave them my full attention. When the call ended 45 minutes later, my notification screen was a wall of panic. 14 missed calls, 6 frantic text messages from my sister, and 2 from my mother demanding I fix whatever mistake the airline had made. I picked up the phone, opened the chat, and typed a single reply. The reservation was mine. I canceled it. Less than an hour later, a different number called. It was the travel agent who had originally booked the trip. "Miss Mercer," the agent said, her voice tight with professional anxiety. "Your sister is extremely upset at the departure gate. I just wanted to confirm that the cancellation was intentional. She was screaming that I had ruined her corporate account." I frowned, leaning forward in my chair. "My corporate account?" "Yes," the agent replied, her breathing slightly uneven. "A few weeks ago, Courtney emailed me asking to separate the resort upgrade and the private airport transfers from your personal card. She wanted those specific charges billed directly to a corporate vendor authorization." My hand stopped moving over my notepad. The pen hovered above the paper. "Did she give you the name of the vendor?" "I have it right here," the agent said, and I could hear the rustle of papers in the background. "Crescent Destination Services. I told her I could not process it because you were the primary account holder and the names did not match, but she was quite insistent that it was a standard company expense." "Could you forward me that entire email chain?" I asked, forcing my voice to remain mild and polite. "I need it for my records." "Of course, I will send it right now." I ended the call and reached for the black notebook. The pages fell open naturally to a section I had been reviewing for weeks. I ran my finger down the list of suspicious accounts my mother had pushed through our corporate billing system. Halfway down the second page, I found the exact code the agent had just read to me. I opened my vendor notebook, found the code beside Crescent Destination Services, and realized my sister had tried to bill her honeymoon to the same company I had been questioning for months. The notification chime broke the silence in my Northline office. My laptop screen illuminated with a new message from the travel agent, containing the forwarded correspondence I had requested. Opening the thread felt like stepping onto a frozen lake. Courtney had sent 3 emails trying to shift her luxury resort upgrades onto a corporate account. In the second message, my sister explicitly instructed the agent to remove my personal email address from all future updates. The final attachment was a corporate vendor authorization form. It listed Crescent Destination Services as the payee and carried a signature that looked like my mother's sloppy cursive. The travel agent had rejected the transfer because the initial deposit came from my personal card, completely unaware that she had just documented an attempted fraud. I printed the email chain, placed the paper inside my black notebook, and drove across town to the Mercer Event Group headquarters. The moment I walked through the double-glass doors, the heavy sound of theatrical sobbing echoed from the reception area. Courtney sat in one of the guest chairs, surrounded by 3 junior staff members. Her mascara was perfectly smudged, and she clutched a damp tissue in her manicured hand. "She ruined my honeymoon because she is jealous," Courtney said, her voice carrying down the hallway. "She always uses money to punish people." My mother stood beside her, arms crossed tightly over a silk blouse. Constance turned her sharp gaze toward me as I approached. "You will wire Courtney the exact amount for those replacement flights right now, Danielle. This behavior is unacceptable." The junior employees scattered, returning to their desks with their heads down. I did not apologize, and I did not lower my voice to manage the crisis. "The honeymoon was a wedding gift," I said, keeping my hands relaxed at my sides. "That gift expired the moment you stood in our living room and told me I was not part of this family." Courtney stood up, dropping the damp tissue onto the reception desk. The tears vanished completely, replaced by a tight, rigid anger. "You are going to regret this, Danny." "Noted." I walked past them, entered my office, and locked the door behind me. The noise outside did not matter. Sitting at my desk, I woke up my workstation and logged into the Enterprise Resource Planning System, using my standard operating officer credentials. I did not attempt to access my mother's private emails or download the entire server. I simply opened the vendor master file and the accounts payable summary, areas I reviewed every week as part of my job. Typing Crescent Destination Services into the search bar pulled up a sparse profile. A single invoice sat in the cleared payment history. The amount was $18,740, categorized under Destination Logistics. I clicked the hyperlink to view the supporting documentation. The system loaded a standard approval packet, and my stomach tightened. The final page bore my digital signature. I stared at the screen, analyzing the details instead of reacting to the shock. The approval date stamped next to my name was October 14th. That date triggered an immediate memory of the plastic conference badge sitting in my Northline desk drawer. October 14th was impossible. Opening a new tab, I pulled up my personal calendar, my flight confirmations, and a hotel receipt from Denver. I had been out of state attending an operations summit that entire week. Navigating to the system security logs, I checked my account activity for that specific Tuesday. The record showed 0 logins from my credentials. My account had been completely inactive, while someone approved a massive payment using my name. Zooming in on the signature itself, the problem became obvious. The ink weight was perfectly flat, lacking the slight variation in pressure I always made on the loop of the letter D. It was a flawless pixel copy taken from a venue contract I had signed 3 years ago. I did not jump to conclusions immediately. The next 20 minutes were spent checking my sent folder and archived messages, making absolutely certain I had not emailed a pre-approval before my flight or authorized anyone to process the change order in my absence. The search returned nothing. No emails, no support tickets, no verbal authorizations recorded in the system. Reaching into my purse, I pulled out my phone and opened the camera. I took clear photographs of the monitor, ensuring the document numbers, the file paths, and the system timestamps in the corner of the screen were visible. Writing down the exact time of my access in my notebook protected the chain of custody. Then I dialed my personal attorney, Marisol Vega, bypassing the company legal counsel entirely. Marisol answered on the second ring. I explained exactly what I had found in 3 concise sentences. "Stop talking," Marisol said, her voice dropping into a flat, clinical register. "Answer these 3 questions carefully. Did you have legal authorization to view that specific file?" "Yes," I replied. "It is part of the standard accounts payable packet. Did you alter the file, download it to a personal device, or change the metadata in any way?" "No. I only took a photograph of the screen. Have you spoken to your mother, your sister, or anyone else about this document?" "Not a word." I heard the scratch of a pen on paper through the speaker. "Good. Do not confront them. Do not ask for an explanation, and do not hint that you know about the vendor." "They forged my signature to steal from our company," I said, gripping the phone tightly. "It is worse than that, Danielle," Marisol told me, her tone carrying a heavy, undeniable certainty. "Someone is not only stealing from the company, someone is building a case that says you did it." The plastic Denver conference badge rested inside a cardboard storage box beneath my Northline desk. Right beneath it lay a faded business card from a New York hospitality group, dated 2013, the year my father died. Staring at that embossed card brought back the heavy weight of the choices I made instead of taking that flight. Covering payroll from my meager savings. Paying the property tax on my mother's sprawling estate. Absorbing the crippling debt from a boutique salon Courtney abandoned after 6 months. Each time, there had been a perfectly crafted excuse, and each time, my sister was shielded from the consequences of her actions. My quiet endurance had simply become the economic structure keeping our family afloat. I closed the box and locked the drawer. Stepping back, I looked around the small leased office. This space belonged entirely to me. So did the townhouse deed filed under my name, the emergency fund holding 12 months of living expenses, and the 3 active client contracts sitting on my desk. 18 months ago, when I finally refused to co-sign another loan for my sister, the subtle shift in their behavior had warned me. I had not taken a single dollar from Mercer Event Group to build this life. Northline operations existed because I knew, on some fundamental level, that my family would eventually bleed my father's legacy dry. My cell phone vibrated with a text from Marisol. The attorney wanted an exact log of every document I had viewed, emphasizing that I must only record files within my authorized access level. I transferred the screen photographs to a secure encrypted drive and forwarded a copy to her office. We needed an expert. Using my personal checking account, I wired a retainer fee to Lillian Cross, a forensic accountant Marisol trusted implicitly. We were moving carefully, building a fortress of verifiable facts before Constance or Courtney realized I was looking. Sitting back down at my workstation, I ran a public business registry search on Crescent Destination Services. The results loaded slowly on the aging state database. Crescent listed a specific mailing address and a forwarding phone number. I cross-referenced those details against the Mercer vendor master file and found 4 other event supply companies sharing the exact same contact information. All 5 entities pointed to a single registered agent named Skylar Monroe. The name made my pulse thrum against my wrist. Skylar was Courtney's former college roommate. Just a week prior, my sister had claimed they had not spoken in years, lamenting the sad loss of their friendship. Yet, scrolling through a private social media album from the secret wedding, I found a candid photograph of the reception. Skylar Monroe stood directly beside the bride, holding a glass of champagne and laughing. A sharp chime pulled my attention away from the photograph. An automated system notification appeared in the corner of my screen. 18 months ago, I had configured the accounting software to flag any unapproved modifications to vendor profiles. The alert showed that the mailing address for Crescent Destination Services had just been updated. The system timestamp indicated the modification occurred mere hours after Courtney returned from the airport. They were actively scrubbing their digital footprints. I quickly saved both the previous and the newly modified version histories, securing the technical evidence of their panic. An hour later, an email from Constance arrived in my inbox, marked with high importance. Attached was the massive compliance packet for the pending sale of Mercer Event Group to an outside buyer. The message body contained a strict directive requiring me to electronically sign the operational representations within 72 hours. Scrolling through the heavy legal text, I found the operational accuracy clause. The document required the chief operating officer to personally certify that all vendor schedules and financial reports from the past 3 years were absolutely correct. If I applied my signature to that page, the fraudulent invoices and the network of shell companies would become my legal responsibility. My mother and sister would collect their massive payout from the acquisition, leaving me holding the liability for a $500,000 theft. Constance had placed a single sentence beneath the signature line of her email. Sign the packet by Friday, and do not embarrass this family again. My fingers rested on the keyboard for a long time before I drafted a reply to the compliance packet. Sending a flat refusal would only give them a reason to call me emotional. And I needed to remain firmly within the boundaries of a corporate officer executing her duties. I requested the complete vendor due diligence files, the original change orders for Crescent Destination Services, and a full, independent review of the accounts payable ledger. Adding a specific question about approvals generated during my scheduled absences, I made sure to copy the buyer counsel on the thread. The message clearly stated that I could not certify the operational accuracy until these items were provided. An hour later, my cell phone rang with a summons masquerading as a dinner invitation. Constance insisted we needed to clear up a simple internal misunderstanding in person. Arriving at the house we grew up in, I found the dining room table set for 3, though nobody was eating. The smell of roasted chicken and rosemary filled the room, clashing with the sterile glow of a silver laptop sitting directly next to my dinner plate. The screen displayed an open DocuSign envelope sent by the company counsel. Right beside it, another tab held a draft email ready to send to the buyer, withdrawing my audit request entirely. "You punish people with money when you do not get your way," Courtney said from across the table, swirling her wine glass. "You ruined my honeymoon, and now you are trying to ruin Mom's retirement, just to prove a point." My mother smoothed the napkin on her lap. Her voice was a masterclass in calm authority. "This is a basic formality, Danielle. The buyer is waiting. You just need to enter the authentication code they texted you, sign the document, and click send on that draft. We can keep this family intact and save your father's legacy from public embarrassment." I looked at the glowing screen, and then I looked at the woman who raised me. The heavy wooden chair beneath me had belonged to my father, and sitting in it now felt like a very deliberate choice on her part. "Why is an independent audit so dangerous that you need me to withdraw the request tonight?" I asked quietly. Constance reached across the linen tablecloth and rotated the laptop toward me. She tapped the keyboard once, bringing the authentication field into focus. "Read me the code, Danielle." I pulled my cell phone from my pocket. The notification with the 6-digit security pin glowed on the lock screen. Pressing the side button, I turned the display black and placed the device face down on the table. Reaching forward, I closed the laptop. The quiet click of the latch sounded incredibly loud in the dining room. I did not delete the draft or reject the signature envelope, ensuring I could not be accused of destroying company property. "I will sign the certification after the independent audit is complete," I said, standing up from the table. "My personal counsel will review the final report first." The maternal mask slipped. Constance stood up, her palms flat against the table. "If you walk out that door, you are done at Mercer Event Group. My equity and my liability do not disappear because of a dinner," I told her, walking toward the hallway. Before starting my car, I sent a brief email from my phone to the buyer counsel, confirming I had not signed the documents, had not withdrawn my audit request, and had not authorized anyone to sign on my behalf. The next afternoon, Marisol and I sat in a quiet conference room reviewing the preliminary findings with Lillian Cross. The forensic accountant spread a series of printed vendor invoices across the table. She pointed out identical invoice templates used across 5 different companies, repeated spelling errors on the line items, and approval dates that had clearly been modified after the payments cleared the bank. Lillian adjusted her glasses and explained that we were looking at a distinct pattern of behavior. It was not a legal conclusion yet, but it was enough to justify a deep forensic dive. I accepted the slow pace, knowing the evidence had to withstand intense scrutiny. Courtney tried to accelerate the conflict that same evening. She left a 3-minute voicemail on my personal line, her voice thick with exaggerated crying as she called me a bitter, jealous woman who hated seeing her happily married. I did not return the call. Instead, I sent a single text stating that all company inquiries needed to go through official corporate email. She replied immediately, threatening to tell the entire staff who I really was. I took a screenshot and saved the threat to my secure drive. The real retaliation arrived the following morning. Sitting down at my Northline desk with a fresh cup of coffee, I attempted to log into the Mercer Enterprise Resource Planning System. Access denied. My corporate email account returned the exact same error. I did not try my old passwords, nor did I call the IT department to bypass the block. Marisol had explicitly instructed me to let the lockout happen and document the exact time my credentials were revoked. A few minutes later, a former colleague forwarded me a company-wide memo. The email announced that the chief operating officer was taking a temporary leave of absence while the executive board reviewed financial irregularities within the operations department. My phone vibrated against the wood surface. The caller ID showed Malcolm, the lead representative for the buyer group. I answered on the first ring. Malcolm sounded deeply confused. He asked why I had sent an email denying my signature the previous night, only to submit a fully executed certification form this morning. The document had been transmitted from the Mercer server just moments after my system access was revoked. Closing my eyes, I pictured the lifeless, flawless pixel copy of my signature from the Denver invoice. They had not just fired me. The buyer was holding a certification I had never signed, sent from a system I could no longer enter, under a title my mother had just taken away from me. Marisol did not waste a single second after my conversation with Malcolm. Working from her immaculate glass office, the attorney drafted a formal preservation notice and sent it directly to the buyer, the corporate lender, and the Mercer Event Group Council. The document stated in clear, unambiguous terms that the certification transmitted that morning did not bear my authorized signature. We demanded the immediate preservation of the original file, all email routing headers, and the complete server access logs. We did not accuse my mother or sister directly, choosing instead to let the legal request stand on its own weight. The buyer officially paused the closing, though they did not walk away completely. Silence from the company only lasted a few hours before the narrative began to shift. Courtney wasted no time moving through the office, telling anyone who would listen that her sister had been caught moving money without board approval. Staff members who used to bring me their morning coffee suddenly stopped answering my texts. Constance handled the extended family, calling my aunts and uncles to explain how my petty wedding jealousy was now actively destroying our father's legacy. The real cost hit me the following Tuesday. A prospective Northline operations client called to cancel their signed deposit check. The business owner mentioned vague industry rumors about financial irregularities tied to my name, his voice tight with awkward apologies. My jaw ached as I ended the call and stared at the quiet walls of my private office. Earning that contract had taken weeks of careful negotiation, and a few lies from my family had burned it to the ground. Despite the stinging loss, I kept my hands off my social media accounts and refused to post a public defense. Patience paid off when Lillian secured temporary viewing rights to the disputed certification file through the buyer council. We gathered around the forensic accountant's laptop, watching her pull up the raw properties of the document. The digital footprint told a fascinating story. According to the hidden author layer, the file had been created on a desktop computer permanently assigned to Constance's private suite. However, the transmission log showed the document being uploaded to the buyer portal using a security token registered to Erin Shaw. Erin was Courtney's young administrative assistant. Remembering all the times she had stayed late to run rush packets for the executive team, I could see how easily someone might assume she was the mastermind. The temptation to let the blame fall on a careless employee hovered in the room. Resolving a major security breach quickly would certainly appease the buyer. I refused to let my sister turn a 29-year-old assistant into her newest scapegoat. Marisol contacted Erin through proper legal channels, inviting her to speak without making any immediate threats. The assistant sat in our conference room 2 days later, her hands trembling so badly she could barely hold her paper coffee cup. She confessed that Courtney had borrowed her physical security token while Erin was out for a medical appointment. The creative director had claimed an urgent board packet needed to go out immediately. Reaching into her purse, Erin pushed her phone across the table. The screen displayed a saved email where Courtney explicitly asked for the token and promised to return it in 10 minutes. Right below that message sat a screenshot of a text sent hours later instructing the assistant to delete the token request due to a new security policy. Erin had kept the screenshot simply because the aggressive demand made her uneasy. She had been careless, but she had not built the fraudulent file. That exact email chain went straight to Malcolm. Reviewing the conflicting transmission logs, the buyer group delivered a harsh ultimatum to my mother. The acquisition would only proceed if they allowed a comprehensive, independent audit of the entire operations department. Constance tried to block the request, arguing that the delay would ruin their quarterly projections, but the corporate lender sided with Malcolm. The disputed certification made the bank nervous about their own liability. That hesitation forced the door wide open, granting Lillian the legal authority to dig deep into the Mercer accounting system. Before leaving the conference room, Erin offered one final piece of information. She described a specific directory she had spotted on Courtney's laptop screen while dropping off mail the previous week. The folder was labeled Danny Closeout. The assistant recalled seeing a detailed checklist inside that directory. The document outlined steps to revoke my system access, notify the staff of my suspension, generate a media response, and force a signed certification. We did not have the full files yet, but Erin remembered the creation dates sitting next to the document names. The first date inside the closeout folder was 3 weeks before Courtney's wedding, which meant my family had planned my fall before they ever laughed and told me I was not family. The formal audit scope required signatures from the buyer, the corporate lender, and the company counsel before Lillian could touch the servers. Once the ink dried, the forensic accountant gained full, unrestricted access to the enterprise accounting software and 3 years of bank statements. I stayed completely out of the system. My involvement was strictly limited to answering process questions in Marisol's glass conference room, ensuring nobody could accuse me of steering the results. By the end of the first week, Lillian had isolated 43 suspicious invoices. The total hit $486,300. Lillian projected the master spreadsheet onto the wall monitor, walking us through the methodology. The fraudulent charges were buried under vague categories like destination logistics, emergency rentals, and marketing support. Each invoice sat just under the financial threshold that would trigger an automatic board review. Looking at the dates, a sickening pattern emerged. The payments always cleared immediately, following our largest client deposits, perfectly masking the cash flow drain. I remembered scrambling to cover payroll during those exact weeks, losing sleep over vanishing margins while my family quietly siphoned the profits. The financial pressure inside Mercer Event Group escalated as the audit dragged on, pushing the remaining staff to a breaking point. Brenda, our veteran controller, asked for a private meeting on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The older woman arrived at the law office clutching a thick manila envelope against her chest, her knuckles completely white. "Your mother threatened my severance," Brenda said, refusing the glass of water Marisol offered. "Constance told me you had personally authorized the vendor exceptions, and if I pushed back, she would fire me for insubordination." Instead of lashing out at her silence, I kept my voice steady and focused on the evidence. "What exactly did she ask you to do?" Brenda opened the envelope, sliding a stack of printed correspondence across the mahogany table. The pages contained direct emails from the chief executive account, explicitly ordering the accounting department to bypass standard vendor verification. Another email thread demanded that Brenda backdate supporting documents for Crescent Destination Services. Our controller had kept handwritten meeting notes documenting every time Constance forced a payment through the system, creating a perfect paper trail of executive coercion. We had the internal mechanism, but the external network still pointed to a single liability. Public business registrations painted Skylar Monroe as the mastermind behind all 5 shell companies. Marisol reached out through Skylar's retained counsel, offering a brief window for cooperation before the findings went to the authorities. Courtney's former college roommate folded almost immediately. Sitting across from us the next morning, Skylar admitted that my sister paid her a monthly retainer to serve as the registered agent for what Courtney called event incubator companies. "I knew it felt wrong," Skylar muttered, twisting a silver ring on her index finger, but she swore it was a legitimate tax strategy. To prove her limited involvement, the woman handed over her cell phone records and gave Lillian direct viewing access to the limited liability company bank statements. The text messages between the 2 college friends destroyed my sister's victim narrative completely. Courtney dictated the exact dollar amounts, the service descriptions, and the billing dates for every single fake invoice. One specific text made the room go completely silent. "Mom will approve it. Danny never sees the small ones." Another message instructed Skylar to purposefully misspell logistics on a new invoice to perfectly match the old template. Courtney knew exactly what she was building. Yet, the massive outgoing wire transfers required executive authorization, confirming Constance remained the ultimate gatekeeper for the stolen funds. The web expanded outward, catching people who had chosen the comfort of willful ignorance. Connor called my personal line late Thursday evening. He started the conversation with loud accusations, blaming me for tearing his new marriage apart over a canceled vacation. "Where did the down payment for your new house come from?" I asked, cutting through his tirade. Dead silence hung on the line. The aggressive bravado vanished. "Courtney said it was a corporate distribution," he finally whispered. "An early inheritance payout from your mother." I told him to check his closing disclosure. 10 minutes later, an encrypted email arrived from his address. The attached property settlement document showed a massive wire transfer of $62,000 dropping directly into their escrow account. The sender was Crescent Destination Services. Digging through a drawer in his home office, Connor had also found formation paperwork for another shell company, carrying his social security number and a signature he had never provided. Lillian took the closing disclosure and ran a direct reconciliation against the Mercer bank statements. She matched the financial flow in 3 simple steps. First, our family business paid a fake invoice to Crescent. Next, Crescent held the funds for less than 48 hours. Finally, the shell company wired the exact amount to the title company handling Courtney's real estate closing. Staring at the routing numbers on the screen, a cold clarity settled over me. The luxury honeymoon was nothing but a minor, incidental expense. The stolen money had built a life my sister used to prove she was more successful than me, while I worked 60 hours a week to keep our father's company solvent. Connor agreed to surrender the original documents to Marisol, admitting he had intentionally ignored the red flags because he wanted the sprawling suburban property. He hung up the phone and began the painful process of separating his bank accounts. I packed up my briefcase and left the law office, stepping out into the damp evening air. Crescent had not merely paid a fake invoice. Within 48 hours, it had bought my sister the front door she planned to lock me out of forever. Following Marisol's strict instructions, we drafted a formal list of audit inquiries the next morning. I did not attach the bank records or mention Skylar's devastating confession. Instead, my email simply asked 4 procedural questions. Who conducted the initial vetting for Crescent Destination Services? Where was the original change order authorizing their contract? Who personally verified their on-site event management? Why did their registered mailing address suddenly change on the corporate ledger? Sending that message felt like dropping a match into a dry forest. We were forcing them into a corner where they had to either admit the documentation did not exist or manufacture brand new lies to fill the void. The bait worked perfectly. 24 hours later, an automated compliance notice bypassed my suspended account and landed securely in an archived administrative inbox I had configured 18 months earlier. My old vendor modification alert had caught a live change. Someone had just updated the Crescent profile and uploaded a fresh due diligence packet. Pulling the system logs alongside Lillian, we checked the document properties. The version history showed the supposedly original compliance file had been created exactly 3 hours after my inquiry was sent. My sister was actively fabricating evidence while the audit was underway. Panic makes people incredibly sloppy, and Courtney was drowning in it. Skylar's attorney forwarded a frantic voicemail to Marisol later that afternoon. Listening to the audio file in the quiet law office, I heard my sister's voice shaking with genuine terror. Courtney begged her former roommate to delete every text message between them, promising a massive cash payout if Skylar would sign a sworn declaration claiming the incubator companies were her own brilliant idea. That desperate recording transformed a simple case of corporate embezzlement into active witness tampering. The mounting pressure finally cracked my mother's polished exterior. Constance summoned me to the company counsel's downtown office on a rainy Thursday morning. The heavy oak boardroom smelled of stale coffee and expensive leather. Sitting across the massive table, the chief executive officer did not offer tears or apologies. She offered a transaction. "We can reinstate your title by tomorrow," Constance said, her hands folded neatly over a legal pad. "The buyer is willing to proceed if we smooth this over quickly. You will receive a 10% bump in your post-sale equity distribution, and the company will clear the outstanding debt on your little consulting firm. We will even issue a public statement calling the lockout a regrettable administrative misunderstanding." I looked at the woman who had spent decades teaching me the value of unyielding family loyalty. "And in exchange?" "You sign the certification schedule," she replied, her voice dropping to a low, reasonable hum. "And you terminate this ridiculous independent audit immediately." Leaning back in my chair, I studied her face. Not a single trace of guilt existed in her expression. No. Walking out of the building, the spring rain washed the tension from my shoulders. I pulled my phone from my pocket and drafted a polite follow-up email, documenting her exact verbal offer and formally declining the terms. Constance replied within 10 minutes. Her message was completely unhinged, accusing me of trying to put Courtney in federal prison over a few minor accounting shortcuts. Another perfect piece of written evidence secured. Despite the massive legal case building against them, a stubborn, quiet part of me needed to offer one final chance for honesty. I drove to my childhood home that evening. The sprawling suburban estate felt cold, echoing with the ghosts of family dinners that meant absolutely nothing. Courtney sat on the velvet living room sofa, drinking wine and sneering at my arrival. "Northline operations will never give you the kind of status this family built," my sister mocked, raising her glass toward the ceiling. "You are throwing away your only real asset. Do you want to voluntarily amend the financial reports and return the funds?" I asked, directing the question to my mother. "This is the last window to do it before the buyer takes the findings to the authorities." Constance stood up, her posture rigid with absolute fury. "If you do not stop this witch hunt tonight, Danielle, I will remove you from the will completely. You will not see a single dime of this estate, and you will no longer be my daughter." A strange, profound lightness bloomed in my chest. For decades, the threat of losing their approval had kept me tethered to their endless crises, paying their debts to keep the peace. I do not need an inheritance to survive, I said, keeping my voice perfectly even. I stopped needing you a long time ago. Returning to the audit the following morning, Lillian finally cracked the sophisticated barrier protecting my mother. While Courtney had clumsily routed stolen cash straight to her real estate escrow, Constance had designed a much thicker wall. Reviewing Skylar's detailed banking records, the forensic accountant discovered that Crescent never directly paid the overdue mortgage or property taxes on the family estate. Instead, the shell company wired thousands of dollars in strategic referral fees to a dormant entity called Mercer Legacy Advisory. Constance had established that consulting firm years ago. Digging into the corporate archives, we found 0 active contracts, no timesheets, and absolutely no deliverables to justify those massive referral payments. The laundering cycle was brilliantly simple. Once the dirty money landed in the advisory account, the chief executive officer authorized pristine owner distributions directly to her personal checking. From there, she paid her luxury housing expenses with completely washed funds. Brenda, our terrified controller, provided the final lock on the timeline. She confirmed that Constance explicitly timed the Crescent payments to execute immediately after our largest corporate clients cleared their deposits. My sister had stolen out of raw greed, but my mother had managed the theft with absolute, chilling precision. The ultimate proof of her architectural role arrived late Friday afternoon. Malcolm, representing the buyer group, had authorized a deep sweep of the executive communication servers. His legal team recovered a deleted email chain originally attached to a restricted board packet. Marisol projected the restored text onto the conference room monitor, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The message was dated 3 weeks before the secret wedding. Constance had written to her younger daughter, confirming the timeline for the acquisition. Danny has to certify the vendor schedule. Operations belongs to her. Courtney had replied 2 minutes later, her text stripped of any sisterly warmth. What happens if she actually reads the files and refuses to sign? The final response: once she signs, the buyer's problem is operations. Staring at the glowing monitor, the last fragile thread tying me to my childhood finally snapped. The temporary suspension, the whispered rumors, the dinner with the fake authentication code were not panicked reactions to my canceled honeymoon. It was a carefully calculated trap. My sister had stolen the money. My mother had designed the grave they meant to bury me in. The conference room at the downtown law firm felt like a refrigerated vault compared to the heavy June humidity baking the Columbus streets outside. 10 leather chairs surrounded a massive mahogany table. Marisol sat to my right, calmly arranging her pristine legal folders. Lillian Cross took the seat directly across from the corporate lender representative and the buyer counsel. Brenda sat near the door, her hands trembling in her lap, while Connor occupied a corner chair, looking pale and exhausted. My mother and sister arrived 5 minutes late. Constance swept into the room wearing an immaculate tailored suit, carrying the absolute confidence of a chief executive officer who still believed she controlled the narrative. Courtney trailed behind her, wearing minimal makeup and clutching a designer tissue. Neither of them brought a lawyer. They genuinely thought this was a family intervention they could manipulate with guilt and tears. Taking her seat at the head of the table, Constance did not wait for company counsel to open the proceedings. She folded her hands and aimed a look of deep maternal sorrow toward the buyer group. "I want to personally apologize for this delay," my mother began, her voice perfectly modulated. "My eldest daughter has been struggling with severe emotional instability lately. Being excluded from a small family wedding triggered a rather spectacular breakdown, and she has decided to hold this acquisition hostage out of spite." Courtney dabbed at her eyes with the tissue. "Danny canceled my honeymoon while I was standing at the departure gate. She left me crying in the airport just to punish me." The men in the expensive suits shifted uncomfortably. Constance smiled, a tight gesture of victory, expecting me to raise my voice and prove her point. Instead, I opened my leather portfolio and slid a single sheet of paper across the polished wood. "I did cancel the resort package," I said, keeping my tone as flat as a weather report. "The booking was exclusively in my name, and the charges sat entirely on my personal credit card. That is exactly why the travel agent rejected your request the day before the wedding." Courtney dropped the tissue. I do not know what you are talking about. The agent made a mistake. Why did you explicitly ask the agency to bill your private airport transfers and luxury room upgrades to Crescent Destination Services? I asked, pushing the printed email correspondence toward the center of the table. My sister swallowed hard. She looked at our mother, then back to the paper. The buyer counsel leaned forward, pulling the document closer. The email contained Courtney's official corporate signature block and a scanned copy of her driver's license, completely eliminating the possibility of a clerical error. The honeymoon was no longer a tragic family anecdote. It was the entry wound. Lillian Cross stood up and activated the wall monitor. The forensic accountant did not waste time on complex accounting theories. She displayed an incredibly simple flowchart. The graphic traced money leaving Mercer Event Group, landing in the Crescent vendor account, and immediately filtering down into 4 other limited liability companies managed by Skylar Monroe. Those 5 entities share a single mailing address and identical invoice templates, Lillian explained, her voice echoing in the quiet room. She clicked a button, bringing up a massive invoice for $18,000. This document authorized a payment to Crescent last October. It carries a digital signature belonging to the Chief Operating Officer. I reached into my bag and pulled out the plastic conference badge, setting it gently on the table alongside my hotel receipt and airline boarding pass. I was attending an industry summit in Denver that entire week, I told the room. System logs confirm my user account experienced 0 activity during the exact hour that approval was generated. Someone copied a signature from a 3-year-old venue contract and pasted it onto a fraudulent invoice. Malcolm, the lead representative for the buyer group, cleared his throat and opened his own laptop. He looked directly at Constance. That matches our findings regarding the final certification schedule you submitted to our portal last Tuesday. The buyer counsel took over the explanation. He detailed how the original metadata proved the document originated on a desktop computer permanently assigned to the executive suite. Anticipating the obvious defense, he read aloud the email Courtney had sent to Aaron Shaw, tricking the young assistant into handing over her security token. The access logs proved the forged certification was uploaded an hour after my mother had permanently revoked my corporate credentials. Constance adjusted her posture, her eyes darting toward the door. Courtney handles a vast amount of internal paperwork. If my daughter made a reckless mistake with the compliance files, I will personally ensure she is disciplined. The color completely drained from my sister's face. Courtney stared at the woman who raised her, finally realizing that loyalty in our family only flowed in one direction. Constance was actively preparing to sacrifice her youngest child to save the acquisition. Before the creative director could speak, Connor stood up from his corner chair. He walked to the table and dropped a thick stack of real estate closing disclosures next to my hotel receipt. The groom did not look at his bride. $62,000 went straight into the escrow account for our new house, Connor said, his voice raw with humiliation. The wire transfer came directly from Crescent Destination Services. Lillian nodded, advancing the presentation to the next slide. That explains the direct theft, but the laundering structure ran much deeper. The monitor displayed a secondary financial web. We watched the flow of corporate cash moving from Crescent into a dormant consulting firm called Mercer Legacy Advisory. The forensic accountant explained that no services were ever rendered, yet massive referral fees piled up in the advisory accounts. Within days of those deposits, Constance authorized pristine owner distributions straight to her personal checking. The bank statements proved the chief executive officer used those washed funds to pay her property taxes and catch up on a delinquent mortgage. Both of them had stolen my father's money. Courtney had simply grabbed the cash directly, while Constance had built an elegant, deniable mechanism to hide her greed. The final blow came from the quietest person in the room. Brenda opened her manila envelope and distributed copies of the executive emails demanding the accounting department bypass due diligence. The veteran controller looked Constance directly in the eye, refusing to flinch. The buyer counsel picked up the final sheet of paper. He adjusted his glasses and read the recovered message from the deleted board packet. Danny has to certify the vendor schedule, the attorney read, his voice carrying the weight of a judge reading a verdict. Once she signs, the buyer's problem is operations. The room erupted into chaos. Courtney pointed a trembling finger at our mother. screaming that the CEO had told her the incubator companies were perfectly legal tax distributions. Constance lost her polished composure entirely, shouting that her youngest daughter had fabricated the invoices and spent the vast majority of the stolen cash. They threw terrible specific details at each other, desperately trying to save themselves while simultaneously confirming every single element of the fraud. They provided motive, opportunity, and intent in front of 3 different corporate lawyers. Malcolm slammed his laptop shut. The sharp crack echoed like a gunshot, silencing the screaming women instantly. "My client is officially terminating the letter of intent," Malcolm announced, packing his briefcase with precise, angry movements. "The financial representations are entirely fraudulent, and we will not expose our investors to this liability." The corporate lender representative stood up next. He informed the room that the bank was immediately halting all new credit draws. They would not freeze the accounts required for basic employee payroll, but an independent restructuring officer would be appointed by the end of the day to approve every outgoing penny. Constance glared at me, her chest heaving as she tried to salvage her broken kingdom. "Get out of my building, Danielle. You are completely finished here. Nobody moved to escort me out." The company counsel did not look at my mother. He slowly gathered his legal pads and stacked his folders. I stood up and buttoned my suit jacket. "I did not destroy this company. I stopped signing my name beneath your lies." The buyer walked away, the lender took control away from my mother, and company counsel closed the folder. "This is now a criminal referral," he said. Justice did not arrive overnight. Weeks bled into months of federal subpoenas and endless interviews conducted inside sterile, windowless conference rooms. An independent restructuring officer took complete control of the Mercer cash flow, locking the executive suites and freezing all discretionary spending. Essential payroll cleared every Friday, and fully funded events went off exactly as planned, but the unbacked bookings received standard corporate refund notices. Constance practically begged the board to reinstate my operations title, hoping my presence would steady the sinking ship. I refused to step foot in that building, knowing that returning meant stepping right back into the savior role they had exploited for years. Instead, I spent my evenings sitting at my Northline desk, helping Brenda and the junior staff polish their resumes. The young event coordinators cried over lost benefits, while the older warehouse managers worried about their pensions. We reached out to trusted vendor networks, quietly securing new positions for the people who had actually kept the family business running. I strictly avoided taking a single corporate client list. Marisol monitored every move I made, ensuring my consulting firm stayed entirely above board and free from any unauthorized solicitation claims. Naturally, as Mercer contracts expired, several prominent clients sought out Northline through organic referrals. They wanted the operational stability they were accustomed to, and we signed them legally, building a foundation without stealing from a dying company. The federal investigation unspooled rapidly because the supporting players chose self-preservation over loyalty. Erin handed over her security token emails during her first interview, definitively clearing her name from any mastermind accusations. Skylar took one look at the wire fraud statutes and broke down completely. Accepting responsibility for the nominee limited liability companies, the former college roommate signed a formal cooperation agreement with federal prosecutors. Connor proved equally pragmatic. The groom delivered a mountain of financial disclosures to the authorities, separated his bank accounts, and officially filed for divorce. Sitting in a deposition room with his posture slumped, the man finally admitted he had swallowed my sister's convenient lies because he desperately wanted the sprawling suburban property and the status it provided. Even as the legal net tightened around them, the women who raised me tried to manipulate the public narrative one last time. Courtney posted a tearful video on her social media feed, staring into the camera and claiming our mother had emotionally coerced her into creating those fraudulent invoices. The performance was flawless, right down to the trembling lip. Less than a day later, Constance retaliated. The chief executive officer stood in the country club dining room, loudly telling former friends that her jealous eldest daughter had orchestrated the entire scandal to steal the business. Their desperate fiction collapsed under the weight of hard evidence. The forensic audit timeline, the recovered text messages, and the subpoenaed bank records proved exactly who had stolen the money and how they tried to hide it. A federal judge formally barred both of them from accessing the enterprise systems or holding any executive authority. Faced with mountains of undeniable proof, their resistance crumbled slowly over the passing seasons. Courtney eventually accepted a plea agreement. Standing in a quiet courtroom, my sister pleaded guilty to federal charges involving wire fraud, falsified business records, and criminal conspiracy. Our mother fought the inevitable much longer. Constance hired an aggressive defense team, convinced she could charm her way out of the indictment, right up until the prosecutors played the recorded testimony from Brenda. The veteran controller, armed with those damning executive emails and the Mercer Legacy Advisory Bank transfers, completely destroyed the chief executive officer's defense. Constance signed her own plea deal shortly after that hearing. The court established a strict restitution plan, prioritizing the defrauded clients, the remaining corporate entity, and the insurance providers before anyone else saw a single dime. The financial consequences hit them with brutal, systemic efficiency. The court ordered the immediate sale of Courtney's new home, funneling the massive equity payout directly into the restitution fund. Connor finalized his divorce, walking away from the short marriage with a fraction of his dignity and none of the assets he had married into. My mother faced a similar reckoning. Her sprawling suburban estate went onto the open market to satisfy the overdue mortgage, the delinquent property taxes, and her mandatory contribution to the victim pool. Because the referral fees routed through Mercer Legacy Advisory lacked any legitimate service documentation, the authorities pulled that entire consulting account into the restitution calculation. Stripped of its operating capital and executive leadership, Mercer Event Group shrank rapidly. The restructuring officer auctioned off the remaining viable assets, packed the headquarters into cardboard boxes, and began a controlled dissolution. Constance lost the empire she used to control people, while my sister lost the wealthy image she worshipped. The week before the federal sentencing hearing, the autumn sunlight slanted across my Northline desk. My phone buzzed against the wood surface. A voicemail notification popped up from a restricted number. Pressing play, I listened to the sound of Courtney sobbing on the other end of the line. The creative director begged me to submit a statement, claiming Constance had forced her to create the shell companies, swearing it was the only way to keep her out of a federal facility. Less than 10 minutes later, a second call rang through. My mother did not bother with tears. "I am still your mother," Constance said, her voice completely devoid of warmth. "You need to fix this." They had lost their houses, their company, and their reputations. Yet neither woman offered a single apology to the employees they endangered, or the clients they defrauded. They were simply looking for a familiar shield. They expected me to absorb the consequences of their actions, just as I had done for decades. I hung up the phone and opened my laptop. The victim impact statement was blank in front of me, and for the first time, saving my family would mean lying about what they had done. I typed my victim impact statement carefully, focusing on facts instead of grand gestures. The document detailed the financial losses suffered by our clients, the devastating career impact on the staff members who lost their livelihoods, and the systematic theft of my professional identity. I described the immense pressure used to force my certification signature and the calculated betrayal of trust within our family leadership. I did not request a specific prison sentence, and I refused to say I wanted them to suffer. I simply stated the truth of the destruction they had caused. The final lines summarized the reality I had finally accepted. The truth only had room to exist once I stopped paying the cost to keep their secrets. The sentencing hearing for Courtney took place on a crisp November morning. The federal judge handed down a sentence of 30 months in prison, followed by a court-ordered restitution plan and a strict prohibition against holding any fiduciary role involving client money. The court officially noted the premeditated nature of the invoice creation, the deliberate use of shell companies, and the long-term attempt to conceal the fraud. Courtney spent the entire proceeding looking toward the gallery, clearly waiting for me to step forward and offer a last-minute plea for leniency. I kept my eyes fixed on the notepad in front of me, letting the silence stand. Constance appeared for her sentencing the following week. The former chief executive officer received 18 months in federal custody, a mandate for restitution, and a permanent ban from managing any corporate entity in the future. The judge dismantled her defense entirely, noting that as the architect of the frame-up, her attempts to blame her own daughter were particularly egregious. Constance stood at the podium and told the court she only ever wanted to protect her family. I realized in that moment that she had always used the word family to describe the people and assets she wanted to possess, nothing more. 3 days before she was scheduled to report to a minimum security facility, Courtney called me one final time. "You could have stopped this before it went so far," my sister said, her voice sounding small and brittle. "I did," I answered, steadying my breath. "I stopped paying for it." I ended the call. There were no curses, no dramatic declarations of victory, and no lingering grief. My mother called shortly after my sister's departure, needing a place to store some personal belongings before her own reporting date. "I am still your mother," Constance said, her tone demanding and sharp. "You remembered that when you needed somewhere to live," I replied, feeling no sting of regret. "You forgot it when you needed someone to blame." I sent her a list of local storage facilities that fit within a limited budget, but I did not offer my townhouse, and I did not pay a cent for her move. It was an act of compassion with a rigid boundary. 1 year later, the North Line operations office looked different. The space had expanded, the team had grown, and the light hitting my desk felt warm and consistent. Brenda now managed our finances. Her work characterized by a transparent integrity that made every quarterly report a source of pride rather than anxiety. We had just signed a long-term contract with a national boutique hotel chain, a deal that came from a direct client referral, not from any ghost of a family legacy. The walls held framed letters of appreciation and photographs of our diverse, hardworking team. There were no symbols of status here, just the tangible results of honest labor. My phone vibrated on the desk, displaying 2 new messages from the same restricted number. Courtney was asking for money to cover legal expenses, and Constance wanted a deposit for a small apartment. The device started ringing, the screen pulsing with their familiar, demanding requests. I looked at the phone for a long, quiet second, a small smile touching my lips. I turned the device face down on the wood surface and walked into the morning meeting of the life I had built before they ever realized I could leave. If you recognize yourself in this story, understand that the most dangerous lie you can tell yourself is that your silence is protecting the people who treat you like a resource rather than a human being. When you continuously absorb the consequences of someone else's choices, you are not acting as a loving family member or a loyal partner. You are essentially paying a tax to keep them in your life, and that tax will always rise until you have nothing left to give. You deserve to invest your energy, your talent, and your hard-earned security into a life that you own entirely, rather than spending your years subsidizing the instability of others. Boundaries are not acts of cruelty or spite, but the fundamental architecture of a healthy existence, and building them requires you to stop trying to salvage a house that was designed to collapse on top of you. It is entirely possible to move forward with compassion, while firmly refusing to be the safety net for people who refuse to stand on their own. Ask yourself this: if you finally stopped paying the cost for their mistakes today, what kind of life could you begin to build for yourself tomorrow? And what is truly stopping you from starting that renovation right now?